Welcome back. Today's challenge, build a car in a day. Race cars are fun. They're simple, they're quick. So I have a whole bunch of cage stuff sitting there. I have I guess to show you what we got, what we're working with here. This is a 1989 Ford Mustang, a GT, and it already had some sort of it had a cage in it already, or part of a cage, a roll bar, I guess, more of sorts. And then I had these door bars that honestly I have no idea where they went to because there's nothing down there. This car we picked up pretty cheap, and it already had a cage or part of the cage in it, so it kind of saved us a little bit of time there. But this is a drift car now, and we need a full cage, door bars, halo hoop, whatever, and then a bar that comes across. Mainly because we are right-hand drive swapping this car, so I need a bar that goes from that side of the cage to this side of the cage that I can mount everything to. So that's pretty much this car. That's what we're working with here. And then we're doing this on a budget. So the car came with these, and I thought these were for the car, but now I'm not so sure. They don't really quite fit in there. These are the pillar bars. If it was to go from the main hoop forward, down the windshield, and then down to the front, but they don't quite fit in there very well. This is a bar, a halo style cage bar that I had gotten for an S13, and I ended up not using that whole cage kit. I ended up using that cage kit, little parts here and there for other vehicles, so it's actually going to work perfect. I already test fitted that inside the car, and remember it's a halo style, so it's going to take up the front portion of the roof, and it fits in there actually really nicely. Who knew? Foxbodies and 240s are pretty much the same car. So I'm gonna go ahead and tack that halo in there, and then it might allow me to use these, cut them down, and actually get them to fit in there correctly. Because trying to get all three planes trying to work well, it didn't work very good. But if I just have two planes to work with, it might be a lot easier to do. So I'm gonna try that. Even if that doesn't work, it still ends up saving me that much tubing anyways, so yeah, it works out either way. The first thing I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the plates for the tubes in. That way it's just ready to go. The other thing about doing cages is that you need a way to weld on top. There's not very many good ways to actually get to the top of that, but the fact that this is already welded into the car and it's already pretty solid, it looks like they did a pretty decent job at welding it in. I really don't want to cut this back out because that would it's adding more steps to things where, you know, we're trying to keep this budget and actually not take forever on this thing. So I'm going to cut out the halo and see how well it fits and see how much room I got up here. If I think I can safely get it to where I can actually still get a gun or TIG torch up there and weld it, then I think I'm gonna go ahead and send it. I would end up just tacking this on here, get the halo in place, and then work on the other tubes, get them down, tacked up to there, and if everything looks like it's good, I'm certain I'm gonna have less room on top to weld on the front of the halo for the tubes that go down. So if I tack everything in and I like it, I will cut these tacks off, those tacks off, and then pull it down, weld all the way around it, and then put it back up, and then I got an easier weld joint there, and obviously an easy joint down there. But like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and get the plates in, and yeah. Alright, so I got the interiors pretty much cleaned up on the bottom. My plates are welded in, and I went ahead and I got the halo tack welded in place. Now I need to see if I can get the pre-bent tubes to fit in there, and if it does, that'll save me quite a bit of tubes. So. Alright, both of the A-pillar bars are in. They're not ideally how I'd like the shape to be against the A-pillar. When you're in the driver's spot, it's actually not bad. It kind of lines up with the pillar, so it's not terrible. But I think because of the forward rake of the bars there, I'm probably going to end up doing anti-intrusion just to get more bar in front of the feet. But I think that works pretty good. That definitely saved me quite a bit of tube. So now I've got more left to do door bars and the dash bar across there. So the next thing is I need to get my dash bar cut to the right length and then weld it onto the tubes. Go ahead and weld up those joints as good as I possibly can, and then hopefully when I cut the bottoms and then cut the top tacks off, I can kind of tilt it down more and finish the welds on the top. But back here I've got a lot more room to actually get the welder in there and actually weld the tops without having to do anything crazy there, so that works out. Alright, now that the dash bar is in there, I've got the dashboard here. I'm going to go ahead and start taking this apart a little bit, and then I'm going to see if I can fit this dash in there. I've already made a couple measurements. I know that bar, yes, it is kind of out further. I would prefer it to be in there, but that's what we're working with. But I have measured it, and it does fit behind the dash. So now I've just got to relief cut it, take some of the vents out that we won't be using, relief cut it, and test fit it in there. Cage is welded in, it's all in place. And then I've got the dashboard. I got it fitted in there pretty nicely, but it had some damages in it, so I've got some repairs that are setting in now, and then a temporary bar. Once this is bolted into the car, it'll be pretty solid because it'll have multiple points of bolting in, but by itself these things are really flimsy. It's even missing there's supposed to be a little piece that goes there too, so but we'll let that dry up, and then I've got a bracket in there that it will bolt onto the cage, and then I've got to do some brackets on the side, and that'll be pretty good. But while this is going, and that I don't want to do the door bars in there until I've got everything else in there finished, because it's going to make it a pain in the butt getting in and out. So I'm at a stopping point here until I can finish up this point. One of the reasons that I'm doing this next, even though this is kind of like an after, like this is more of a cosmetic thing, is because I want to get the placement of the driver's seat in there correctly in proportion to this. I can kind of move a little bit because I'll be making the cut myself, but I'd still rather it be kind of more as correct as possible. So I want to get this in there, that way I can get the steering column centered to this, and then I can start building more fabrication stuff and more chassis work. So that's why I'm doing this now. But while the dash is drying up, I'm going to go ahead and try to get this rack installed into this car. I went with a G35 sedan rack and a G35 sedan power steering pump, so those are paired together, should work pretty nice. And then the reason why I'm doing a G35 sedan rack on this setup is, some people probably already know this too, but if you want to do a right-hand drive swap on a car, say you got a rack and front system, you want to do a right-hand drive swap, you need a left-hand drive rack behind rack to do your conversion, which is what a G35 sedan is. It's supposed to be left-hand drive and the rack is behind the ball joint on the knuckle. So by moving it towards the front, flipping it around, you end up with the steering shaft turning the correct direction to turn left or right. I'll go ahead and cut the ends, undo the 2 bolts, pull it off, and then see what it takes to mount the new one up. So everything's pretty much cut off the front. I still need to cut off that bracket. I don't particularly like how this is fitting up against there. This portion of the rack hits into the LCA right there pretty hard. I'm pretty sure this is just a high-speed bypass, so say you start going faster and faster, this just bypasses pressure and makes the steering stiffer, so when you go fast it's not like your wheels super floppy. This is either going to work or it's not, so I may end up just cutting this off and hoping that it's like a round port and a round port, and I can just thread it and tap it to block off the bypass. Maybe that'll work, I don't know. But it's probably the best shot that I've got at making this rack work in the first place, and if it doesn't work here then I'm not going to use it anyways. So I think I'm going to go ahead and try to cut that off, see if I can plug that, if it'll work. And then hopefully that'll buy me enough room in here to where this setup works. So the rack is now sitting in place. I've got 1 bolt in it. I did go ahead and cut off that solenoid, and it is indeed 2 little ports. So I will plug those on the rack, and that should hopefully be good. We'll see what happens. I did have to make a compromise. It's not ideally how I'd want it. The rack is off to one side 1/2 inch. It's just really tight in that area with the lower control arm and the part for the steering column there. So that's as good as I can get it. I can go 1/2 inch over, but I'd have to raise the rack up more while I do that, and that also puts everything else in a different position that I don't quite like anyways. So I'm gonna call that good. If I really wanted to make it equal, I could put a 1 inch spacer on the inner tie rod on that side where it bolts onto the actual rack, and that would at least put the pivots on the same position on both sides. Ideally it'd be nice if everything was perfect, but because it's not, I think what we're just probably going to shoot for is just a stiffer set of front springs, just to help kind of reduce the amount of effect that the bump steer will have on that. Ideally, you also want your pivots on the inner tie rod to kind of mirror or mimic the pickups on the knuckle, or if you're modifying your knuckle or whatever, if you were to work from everything, you want everything to be on the same plane and everything. It's kind of hard to explain. There's a lot of geometry that goes on with suspension and steering and bump steer and Ackerman and all sorts of stuff, but I think for what we're doing, I think this will work good enough. So there probably is a better rack option out there. I've got a whole bunch of 240 racks, but these are just so much more common everywhere, more modern, and it's easy to get the rack and the power steering pump together. So it's just kind of more of what I'd prefer to run is something like this. I'm still waiting on the dashboard. I went ahead and fiberglassed some of that, and I'm still waiting on that to dry up. I really don't want to bother that until it's 100% dry. I'd rather not have to do it again. So wait for that. I think I'm pretty much done with the car for right now, I believe. I do have a plan for the pedal setup, but I really need to get the steering column mounted in place first before I can start making the pedals. The steering column is more of a, it needs to go where it needs to go. The pedals I can always build around, but the column itself is a very solid object that just needs to be in place where it needs to go. So that'll be the first thing that goes on, and then I can tackle the pedals, and then after that's all on, I can put the seat in place. Well, just about everything is already back together. Everything that kind of went on from that last point on to here was just kind of tedious, not really worth much to film, just slapping things on, adjusting things, and putting it back together. So, but the rest of the car is pretty much back together. Center console's in, all the stuff's in, shifter works. That's all great. Steering wheel's all back in. Now, the last bit that I've really got to do is I need to wire in the roof lights and all that stuff to the G, which this is S13 right here, and then I've got the G roof connector right here, and then the G, the entire harness from that connector all the way up to the lights and everything. So I just got to go through, figure out which one of these wires do what on the S13, reverse engineer that all the way to the connector, and then splice them together. From there, there's a couple things here and there that's gonna just need to get finished on later, but basically we want to get this thing on the road, heater working, it's winter time, and just kind of make it nice enough to drive around, get some miles on it, make sure everything's all great, and kind of slowly work on little things here and there. There's a couple things in the back that I got to figure out yet. And then I think eventually he wants heated seats. This is a G37 center console, so those switches are a little bit different than the G35 that the car technically is. But I'm sure I could figure out a way to do that. Put heating elements in the seats, and then the wiring harness and stuff is all tucked underneath the seats currently, so it wouldn't take a whole lot. Just redo the upholstery to put the elements in the seats and then make those switches work. I already went through and tested everything. We do have the blower motor heat. We've got all that stuff working. The radio pretty much works, except this has that common G issue where it wants to eject the disc when there's no disc. So a couple things will still need to get replaced or repaired, but that's kind of beyond what we're doing here. That's just extra. So we're gonna go ahead and continue on with wiring up that, get the doors put back on, maybe figure out a temporary source to make the windows roll up and down for now, and yeah, it'll be back on the road. All right, so I think to get my door to work, let's see, I should be able to do that, and that shouldn't change anything. Yep, that does not change anything. And then if I turn that to door, my door grounds, and it turns light on. Cool. So that's how it works. We got it. So now I got to reverse engineer the G and then splice it together. That's gonna do it for this one. Tune in to the next part of this build. We will have this back on the road, heater working, windows up and down, and it'll be nice. Real nice. So yeah, we will see you guys next time. Later.